In this presentation, I'm going to talk about Kenneth Waltz's article from 1988, The Origins of War in Neorealist Theory. And this is one of the first scholarly articles you'll be reading in the course. So I'm going to kind of walk you through it a little bit, a couple points. First of all, it's Waltz 1988. That's the citation. That's how you would cite it in the text. And that just very often, we tend to refer to articles by the author's name, and then we distinguish between all the different things with date. So that's why it's Waltz 1988, but it is in the Journal of Interdisciplinary History. And this is you access this, if you haven't already, you access this through JSTOR at Troy's library. You could probably also try it through EBSCOhost. We have databases of journal articles. And journal articles are generally, the key thing about them is they tend to be peer reviewed. I mean, not all of them are, but they tend to be, when you submit something to one of these things, they go through a peer review process where they're assessed and comments are made. And, so there's some post-production work done on it. And these are the thing you want to focus on. We're going to want you to focus on throughout the program. Okay, a note about references. When you go to JSTOR to look these things up, you will have the opportunity, there's a thing, cite this item, and you click on this tab and it'll offer you 3 different styles of citation. MLA, which is typically done in the humanities and especially English literature. APA, which is American Psychological Association, which is a fine style. Except they tend to just give the author a first initial, not the first name. And then the Chicago style, which is the closest to the APSA style that we want you to use in this program. And here you've got the example, right? I already had in the intro, I had the full citation, the full reference, I should say. Citations are Waltz 1988, and that's what you use in the text, right? When you're doing that. The reference is what you put in at the end of the list. Yes, JSTOR says cite and gives you a reference. Don't get too wrapped around the axle about it. But you'll notice there's some differences though. In the Chicago style, the date, and it's primarily the date of the publication is in parentheses down a little bit later, which is awkward because in a reference list, you organize it alphabetically and by date, and it's really stupid, honestly, to not have the date right after the author's name, especially since in the text, you're going to be like Waltz 1988, and somebody wants to go, oh, where is that? What was that in particular? If they want the details, they're going to go to the reference list and look for Waltz 1988. So it's stupid, right, the way Chicago has it. But that's why APSA has it this other way. So you just move the date up, right? I mean, you move the date right after the author's name, and we don't require parentheses, right, in the APSA style. APA style does. About the only difference that in the fact that APA style does not give you the first name, which is why you don't really want to use that and oh, by the way, what you want to do whenever you get one of these articles, right, you're in JSTOR, my thing is you download the puppy you find some file in your computer, you download the PDF of the file, you write in the name and date, right? So it would be Waltz, and in fact, on my computer, I have a file, Waltz 1988. But I also have a document reference list that I open and I get the citation from JSTOR, and I pick the Chicago citation, and I put it in that list. Every article you get in this course that you have to look up, you are advised, it is recommended by me as something that I actually do religiously, is I capture the citation. If you're going to have something that's going to get in your head, you need to be able to cite it. You need to capture the citation. So go ahead and do it. And you can capture the Chicago style, and then you can re-rent it. Oh, and the only other difference between that is a couple of things to point here. In Chicago, they have accessed September 25th. This is when I just recently accessed this thing. and that's the date I went online and found it. And then the DOI, a DOI is an identifier for a electronic journal item. And those are actually, they've kind of systematized this process. So the DOI is kind of like the URL. If you look at the way especially in our APSA documentation guide, we have URLs, HTTP, blah, blah, blah. DOIs are the same thing, or they substitute for them, and they're actually better. So that tells someone it's a journal article, and it's how you can find an electronic item, and it's how you can find it, right? And so in the APSA style, you'll notice it's just DOI, or it could be the URL, right? HTTP, and then followed parentheses, September 25th, 2000. You don't bother saying access. The thing about APSA style, it's really meant to minimize keystrokes. Why say accessed? Let's just have that date. You know what that date is, right? Why have parentheses around the date? Let's just have a period at the end of it. That's substituting two parentheses for one period, with one period, right? It's all about minimizing stuff. So there are the references. And so this is something I really want to recommend that you do. Again, like I say, I actually do it. Now, looking at this article, when you confront this, one thing I do want to point out, that different journals have different styles. We're telling you, oh, use the APSA style. And, that's just for commonality, okay? Point is, though, there are a bunch of different styles, and every journal seems to have a different style, even in the same discipline. Now, this is the Journal of Interdisciplinary History, which means it's history. Historians like footnotes because they usually use their notes. They're attributing sources. They're documenting where they got a piece of information from. We tend to use in-text references to authors and dates because we tend to be talking about a person's ideas, and we want to keep them in the argument. And it helps. And in fact, we talk about Waltz saying something, and then we have a citation. So it's a different use. If the historians did it our way, it would junk up their writing, right? But for us, the citations are in it. So every journal has a thing. This journal, like I say, it doesn't have an abstract. Science journals, political science journals, social science journals tend to have abstracts, one paragraph summaries of the paper that are meant to be spoilers. It's just meant to be a spoiler. Please do not put abstracts in the essays in this course, or even an abstract is going to be used in a full paper, okay, a full research paper, like your capstone paper. Other times, not so much. The APSA guidance is all about papers at conferences and journals, the full-fledged stuff, right? That format, that refers to that. You don't, it's discussion exercises and essays and things. You don't necessarily need to do that, okay? Keep that in mind. Literature reviews. By the way, the students sometimes complain when they do the literature review that we've been reading all these articles, we don't see them. So I'm going to try to point out where the literature review is. There's not much of one here, to be honest with you. But there is, in the sense that he talks about Morgenthau and about theorizing, neorealism versus realism. And so Morgenthau is the original realist, and Morgenthau wrote in kind of a art, not science way, talking about policy making and history. And so what counts as a lit review here is Waltz talking about Morgenthau and why he didn't have theory and how he, felt about it. And so he's putting what he's about to present, neorealist theory, in the context of realism, right? Because neorealism is new realism, and talking about this issue of to what extent can we theorize or not. And so that basically is the lit review here. Notice there's no section that says lit review. I mean, it's put into the body or the fabric of the narrative, right? So it should be organic and should make sense. Okay, getting into the meat of this. Uh, Structural realism, and here I've got quotes, right? And there's one part as he goes through laying out, he lays out essentially the assumptions of realism, which are elsewhere, like in his book, Theory of International Relations, laid out in greater detail and all. And the assumptions of realism get a lot of attention in the world because and I, in my presentation on realism, I go into that. Here is the quote on page 618 that where he lays out, here are the assumptions. The thing I want you to keep in mind about assumptions is they're constants, right? These are things he thinks are constants in the world. They don't change, but they describe the world. And uh, the, and what changes in the world, and the constants of the world are states as rational actors, unitary actors wanting to survive, anarchy is the essential quality, the absence of essential monopoly legitimate force. Okay, those are the assumptions. What changes in the system is the structure, right? And I could almost have emphasized this: changes of structure and hence of system occur with variation in the number of great powers, meaning when the distribution of power in the system changes, right? That's what changes. So the assumptions about states being unitary actors, those are constants. What does change is the structure, right? And that's where we expect to see the action. Note here also in terms of style, and I'm, because it's early in the course, I'm going to talk about this a little. I put quotation marks around this whole thing. If you were in a paper to have a quote that long, you would double indent it. I'm not going to double indent it because how would you know it was double indented here? And also, it would, I need to fit it on the damn slide. So for here, I'm using quotation marks, and then I've got the citation exactly the way the citation would be: Waltz 1988 618. Oh, by the way, a lot of times journals, they might have 4 issues in a year, and so the first issue of the journal might be page 1 to 400, and the next issue in that year would be 401 to 800. And so some of these page numbers you see from journals get pretty big, and you're like, wow, that's page 600. It's not the first issue of that year, right? That's why you get these cray numbers, just so you know. Okay, and notice APSA style is a symbol. I think they might not need the commas. I put commas in there. I can't help it. I think they even know they're like, oh no, we don't need commas. Waltz 1988 618, and we don't need a P in front of page, right? We just go 618. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, this is how I do it. And slight variations are not a big deal, guys. But making sure that you've got a quote around the word, quotation marks or double indent around the words you're taking, and that you then give the citation, author and date, plus locating information, usually a page number, but there are some things that you have to use other locating, like paragraph 5, some location identifier. That's what you want to do. Okay, but assumptions of realism. That's the section where he goes into them. Security dilemma is a nice discussion of that. Okay, again, I've got this quote, stupid long quote, should be single indented, double indented, and where he's talking about the security dilemma. And this is an important thing, and this is kind of in between. There's levels of, I always break apart Waltz, and I say at one point he'll talk about the fundamentals, the givens, and then they'll talk about the changes in structure, which are the movers of action, and the system. They'll talk about the whole system. However, in between that, we have the security dilemma, which talks about kind of just a interactive effect, right, between units or nations in a system. And this is a big insight from these guys, is that anything you do to make yourself stronger makes other people less secure. You're trying to make yourself secure. You may be doing it just because you're afraid, right? But you make other people afraid. Like, for instance, let's say you're China and you're looking at, some of your security threats, and you know that if you ever had to go to war with Taiwan, your biggest nightmare is a U.S. aircraft carrier battle group rolling into the neighborhood. So maybe you think to yourself, we really need something that can handle that. Lacking our own, at the moment, and for the foreseeable future, battle groups. What could we do? Well, if we could guide a ballistic missile, it could put a big old hole in this thing, one of those guys, because there's this giant floating chunk of steel that can't be hidden. And so you come up with a ballistic missile that can target aircraft carriers, right? That has terminal guidance and can punch a hole, basically. I don't even know if they need a warhead, right? They're moving so fast, they just boom. And great, you're doing it because you're terrified of air carrier battle group. You're totally intimidated because this unstoppable force is coming. But now the United States, you got a missile. Oh, they are creating missiles to destroy our battle groups. Their intentions are to take us. See what I'm saying is that this is like one of the greatest examples of security dilemma, where the Chinese do something to make themselves more secure, and the U.S. responds, very negatively to it, right, or gets worried about it, right, and feels threatened. It's one of the things that is pointed out as being a problem, right? The Chinese, they've got this carrier killer, and so you infer bad intentions from it. So you don't know. I mean, I guess bad intentions can exist, but realists, I got to tell you, one of the things about realism, they're not hawks. Do not assume realists are hawks, because and I think the security dilemma is a great example of, hey, look, there's two sides to this, and you have to consider the other side. And they say that one of the tragedies of international relations is that people will do something to make themselves more secure, and it has the opposite effect, right? And so this is really an interesting thing. But I always say that one of the cool things about uh, realism is it explains other people's actions, right? Remember, when they say that security maximization is a assumption that all states do it, they're saying all states are out to be secure. There are not good and evil states. They're just states seeking to, survive. And so they are very kind of even-handed, and they ask you to take the perspective, and they give you the means to take the perspective of the other guy, which puts them, which means that, this is why I say they aren't necessarily hawks. It is, I think, a misunderstanding of them to apply. They're very non-nationalist. They tend to try to be objective and even in their approach. So just keep that in mind. And I think that section is where Waltz is talking about this. He eventually gets to talking about the dependent variable, the thing he wants to explain, right? And he says, look, any given war is explained not by looking at the structure of the international political system, but by the particularities in it, the situations, characters, la, 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 right? And he says, although particular explanations at, at the unit level exist, general explanations are also needed. And so this is the key thing, right? He is saying, look, we are going to, to explain any particular war, yes, there's a lot that goes on in it. But to generalize about the frequency of war in certain conditions, we need this theory, right? And the systems level theory is what does it. And he says, and I've emphasized it here in bold, a central question of structural theory is this: how do changes of the system affect expected frequency of war? And This is a big deal, right? This is here he is laying out the dependent variable of the theory, the thing he's going to explain. And as Walt says in other contexts, realism doesn't explain everything, but what it explains is important. And a key thing about theories is you need to understand what their dependent variable is and is not. Realism does not explain, or the neo-realist theory, which is all about the international structure, right? Even though here he's talking about all these other things, don't be fooled. It's always about power and polarity. Uh, this stuff, this is what they explain. They don't explain other things. They don't explain why nations grow. They don't explain the growth of nations. They don't explain, China's industrial rise, recent rise. They don't explain the unification of Germany and Italy, which had profound impacts on the world in the 20th century. Basically 2 world wars. They don't explain where that comes from. They use that to explain the frequency of wars. Okay. And this is what they do. So this is always important with theories, to understand what the dependent variable is. What is the thing they're trying to explain? Then, what's the explanatory variable? Well, he goes into a discussion of the merits of bipolarity versus multipolarity. And so that's the key thing. In this paper, he doesn't lay it out maybe as well as could be expected, but basically the structure of the international system in neo-realist theory is the distribution of power, right? And changes in the structure, right, are basically when we have states. So China goes from being really, kind of small and suddenly is the largest economy in the world. Right, that's a change in the power resources that China has. It grows. I mentioned the unification of Germany and Italy. Those were 2 countries. Well, they weren't countries. In the 19th century, they were collections of small states, and the unification of Germany in particular created a huge state in the middle of Europe that didn't exist before. And so the system, the distribution of this power in the system changed as a result of that. And so these are the kinds of things that they focus on. And it's usually in terms of polarity. How many poles of power? How many great powers are there? Right? If there's one, it's unipolar, and this paper doesn't talk about that. If there's 2, that's bipolar, and if it's 3, it's multipolar, right? And it goes on to say an important issue for structural theory to address is whether destabilizing conditions and events are managed better in multipolar or bipolar systems, right? And there we go. Now that's actually, by the way, that's the length of quote you would put in actual quotation marks the way I've been doing here. Just FYI. Key thing though, the answer is, from Waltz's point of view, multipolar systems are war-prone and unstable, and you can get that. I mean, he kind of talks about all these different things, but the gist of it is, for a lot of different reasons, the multipolar system is more unstable. It has greater difficulty reacting to things, and he talks at great length about why that occurs. But it really, I think, just kind of boils down to, in a multipolar system, you don't have a natural balance of power. In a bipolar system, there's me and there's the other guy. Everyone else doesn't really matter. The other guy's my enemy, so that doesn't matter. So, when I have to react to things, I react to things. I have this unity of effort. I don't need to worry about one of my allies defecting because any one of them doesn't really matter. Kind of by definition of a bipolar system, there's only 2 big states that, kind of the idea of a definition of a great power. It's a power that can only be militarily defeated by another great power, right? And if there's 2 great powers, it's a bipolar system. And so, yeah, there you go. This is the explanatory variable, or often known as the independent variable, especially when you do empirical testing. This is the cause to the effect, right? What causes instability or a system, a period of time to be more war prone and unstable? The polarity, right? And so multipolar, bad. Bipolar, good. Unipolar, by the way, he doesn't talk about it here, but in a unipolar system, there's a natural imbalance of power, but there's just one big state, and so there is a piece of sorts, but that one state will tend to organize things because it has it's the 800-pound gorilla. So there is a unipolar example that he doesn't discuss here. Okay, I'm just end up, I'm trying, this has gone way longer than I wanted to, but for the first one, I think, you need to explain a lot of things like references and stuff. He goes on to muddy the water a bit by talking about unit level what creates a particular war. And he notices that nuclear weapons it talks a lot about nukes in that. And in his point of view, a balance of power is the key thing to stopping a war. When there's a balance of power, you don't go to war. And he kind of says, look, nukes are absolute, right? I mean, I got 10 and you've got 100, so you're not 10 times more powerful than me, right? I can destroy a lot with my 10 nukes. You can destroy more with your 100, and so he's kind of making an argument that the possession of nuclear weapons is an absolute balance, that not a relative one, and that two nuclear powers facing each other will be deterred, right? And in way, as if they were equal. And so lots of discussion. You can read it yourself. And it's interesting. It's good and it's important, and it's a nice discussion of that and the role of balance of power in this whole thing. But like I say, when it comes to neorealism, just keep in mind it's what neorealism does, even though he makes all this stuff about unit level predictions, the normal thing they do is make the systems level predictions. And it's about polarity. It's about changes in power in the system. And so keep that in mind as you read this or reread it, and as you go forward, whenever you have to think or talk about realism.